Hands around Westminster. Julian Assange is still in prison for exposing some of the crimes committed by the rich and powerful. The rich and powerful criminals he exposed are so rich and powerful, they are able to have Assange kept in a high security English prison while they get to walk free and request Julian's extradition to America. It made Manus sick on different levels. The mafia dons' reach, their powerful media's ability to besmirch, belittle, undermine and totally misrepresent anything and anyone that challenged or exposed them. And then the human being himself, locked up in a prison cell, sitting isolated while the world goes on outside unheeding, punished for telling the truth, for being brave, for doing the right thing. And then the whole world watching, taking the message on board. Don't mess with the mafia don. Manus wasn't much of an official activist. From a very early age, he had understood a perhaps oversimplified version of how the world was run. A few corporations owned much of the earth's wealth. They had the power to destabilise, undermine, and replace governments that did not serve them. Their creed of profit at any price ensured a hell on earth for millions of human beings, the destruction of environments and the escalation of climate catastrophes. As a kid, Manus had not seen how it was possible to overthrow the corporate empire. He took a lot of drugs and tried to block it out. It didn't work much. He scrounged off the state. In some half-baked way, he kind of thought his lifestyle was a protest. He hadn't done much marching or official protesting until he was the grand old age of 44, and some 24-year-old marching and protesting mature student had started sleeping with him. That had been part of her attraction for him. The fact that she was aware and cared and protested about what was happening in the world. That and the fact that she would have him in bed, of course. That had been 22 years before, and she had long since stopped protesting or having him in bed. Manus didn't take pills, powders, or potions no more, and for the last 17 years, looking after his child had been his priority. They lived in Dublin. He'd been a weird young man, probably neurodivergence caused by trauma, and he hadn't changed that much with age. He didn't care for sports or games or TV, and there were very few movies he could watch till the end. He had never joined any group or club or organisation. He had mostly interacted amongst the underbelly people. People messed up from drinking drugs, unskilled and unqualified, minimum wage if they worked at all people. He had minimal contact with the well-adjusted or accomplished members of a society. When he moved to Dublin at first, there had been a social centre that he could tolerate him. It was called Summer Spree. It reminded Manus of the free festivals he had gone to in England in the late 70s and early 80s. In the press at that time, they were described as drug-crazed anarchists, and there was certainly that aspect to them, but the underlying anti-corporate, anti-capitalist aspect, while seldom mentioned in the press, was always there. Manus had felt at home at the festivals and in Summer Spree. Summer Spree was a left-wing, autonomous social centre where activism was encouraged and grew. It was brought down in large part by an argument over milk. That's how stupid people can be. People who knew they had a bloody great resource centre going were quite prepared to bring it down if they couldn't get their point of view to dominate. All the good things that were being achieved there didn't count if this one issue couldn't be resolved in their favour. Working with people is hard work. They don't know how to communicate properly. They give offence, they take offence, and then they seek revenge. And this was amongst his own side, and of course, he was no exception. Manus sometimes despaired of people. But as he once heard Uncle Nomi say, it's your moral duty to be hopeful. So in 2022, Manus joined two organisations, CATU and DM25. The Community Action Tenants Union were a group who helped prevent evictions in Ireland. They fought on all kinds of levels, dealing with the RTB and councils and landlords. Manus's contribution was limited to standing with other activists in front of rogue landlords and their dodgy security companies' thugs. The word thug is used here to describe anyone who is prepared to evict men, women and children from their homes, legally or otherwise. He went to one of CATU's meetings. He sat around a table and someone asked him why he was there. He said he wasn't sure. Because I'm anti-eviction, and the email said all members were welcome. They asked if he wanted an admin role. He said, no thanks. He mentioned that he disagreed with the you have to pay to be a member policy they had. He didn't understand why they would exclude people who couldn't contribute financially. They said that they would make allowances for people in dire straits. Manus still didn't think it was right. If he was in dire straits, he didn't think he should be forced to go pleading poverty before he was allowed to join. He would say the same thing to DM25 if he ever went to one of their meetings. DM25 was a pan-European movement that aimed to democratise the European Union before it disintegrated. Manus wasn't sure what a democratised European Union would look like, but he liked the sound of it. He imagined it would entail some kind of free press, not a press run by and for big business. A press where alternatives to the present system were aired and seriously discussed. Hope springs eternal. Anyway, perhaps meetings would never be his thing, but his body still worked and he could use it to help stop evictions. He also decided to use it to help form a human chain around the Houses of Parliament in London. The idea was that a few thousand people stood around the buildings would somehow convince the politicians inside to release Julian Assange. Or it was a symbolic gesture. Manus supposed it was better than doing nothing. He got the boat over, recalling previous boat journeys, a summer sailing and young girls on the top deck shrieking with laughter and trying to hold their summer dresses down in the breeze. He had also met his ex-wife on the boat from Ireland. Old man's memories. Manus had hoped to hit London on Saturday morning and sail back on the same day, but there were train strikes and it wasn't possible, so now he was going to stay with his cousin who lived in London. They had shared some of the traumas of living in a small sectarian violent city like Belfast, and some more personalised dramas too, distracting to deal with here. But it had all been a long time ago. She had lived in London for decades. She had never read or watched or listened to any form of media other than mainstream corporate media. She had no interest in the news, she would say, but she must have taken in a fair amount of it, as she would often spew back its contents. Manus had once, a few years before, in a text in the family WhatsApp group, suggested to her that the next time she was in a Harrods, she should pop in to show some support for Assange, who was in the embassy just round the corner. She must have taken offence. She texted something like, she didn't go into Harrods. Manus thought he was slagging her for going into Harrods, like he was slagging her for being rich enough to shop in Harrods. He guessed he was. But it was only a light slag, and we had thought she was going to take offence. He wouldn't have made it. Then she texted, anyway, I don't see why he doesn't just come out and face the music. Manus had not known how to react to that statement. Where did you begin? Manus had been angry. Assange had exposed the crimes of the rich and powerful, and the public had got to know of the crimes. But the rich and powerful criminals had then spent billions on telling the public that their crimes didn't count, or somehow didn't really exist, and the only crime anyone should pay any attention to was the crime of exposing their crimes, which was committed by Assange. Assange the criminal. Kafkaesque, as they say. Manus hadn't contributed to the family WhatsApp since, and was surprised when his cousin Sinead got in touch to say she had heard through his sister that he would be stopped and she could put him up. She met him at Euston. It was great for them both. They hugged each other. Some connections are hard to break. He had told her why he was in London. She said she didn't know Assange was still in prison. He told her he was still being held in a high-security prison while America made another legal appeal to have him extradited for exposing their crimes. Sinead went on the internet and came back with, "I don't understand why he's still in prison when he's already served his time." Assange had been sentenced to 50 weeks in prison for breach of bail, but that had long passed. She said she would go to the protest. She said she didn't really like him or agree with all his stuff, but she didn't think it was fair that he was still in prison after he had served his sentence. Manus didn't know what scraps of misinformation and information she had shuffled up and stuck back together to make her come to her conclusions, but he guessed it was good she went, and go she did. Manus wondered why the people bothered. Not like there was enough of them to surround Parliament and besiege the bastards, and that's what it would take before they would dare say no to America and release Assange. Manus wondered why he went. To say he didn't say nothing when it was being done. He felt like he didn't do anything to stop it. He linked hands with other people and they ringed the Houses of Parliament. He linked hands with his cousin and a girl with an accent he couldn't place. The girl spoke about Bitcoin with Sinead. He spoke to the girl's fella, who was pleased to see such a mixed crowd. He had expected it to be all mad lefties. Manus said he was a drug-crazed anarchist himself, but on the few Assange protests he had been to in Ireland, it had often been made up of conservative old ladies. "Like your cousin," his cousin said, and he had nodded in agreement and she had kicked him lightly on the ass. Manus threw his loud, angry, bitter, violence-threatening, naughty voice into any chants that went on. Westminster didn't seem to notice. It looked impressive and unmovable, far removed from ordinary people. Looked like it was built by God to serve those close to him. Even bearing in mind what V from the movie V for Vendetta had to say on the subject of blowing up symbols, Manus was not keen on wasteful destruction, so with only a little regret, he dismissed the climax of V's endeavours from his head and tried to imagine what good use such a building could be put to. Resource centre for all victims of empire? No, it wouldn't be big enough for that. They had to link hands and turn facing away from the buildings for the video or photo shoot, and that was that. Manus didn't feel good about the protest. He felt useless. Corporations owned the media. They controlled what information was allowed into public view. If some smart, brave bollocks managed to push into public view images or info they didn't want exposed, it won't make any real difference. They will stamp on and silence him. The information and images he published would be drowned out by $1 billion worth of misinformation and another $1 billion worth of trivia. Manus did not know how to fight against the mainstream media, which held so much sway over the way people thought and what they thought about. He felt in debt to Assange and those other brave few who had dared to expose the truth. He felt negative when he saw what was being done to Assange. He tried to be positive. The corporations would never get the win unless we stopped fighting, he could repeat. But Julian Assange is still in prison for exposing some of the crimes committed by the rich and powerful. The rich and powerful criminals he exposed are so rich and powerful they are able to have Assange kept in a high-security English prison while they get to walk free and request his extradition to America.